Today we're going to be talking to Monica Levi, and Monica is an executive coach, and she does a lot of work with startups, and she focuses on coaching for leaders and individuals who are in the leadership positions in startups. And so, Monica, welcome today. And today we're going to talk about a little bit about what you do, and I'm hoping that you could share with us not only your journey and your transition into the startup world, but also we'd love to hear some case stories about your clients to the extent that you could share. And we're looking for some valuable nuggets of information. So thank you again.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm excited. I love what I do. I love working with startups. I love changing businesses and lives, and I am happy to talk about all of it.
Great. So I noticed that you had an interesting journey yourself when you transitioned into coaching. Do you mind sharing with us how you got to the place where you are now and where you're now advising startups into succeeding in startups?
I'm happy to. I do feel like my journey has been very unconventional, and it's been interesting for me looking backwards to see how I've evolved. But I started out as a corporate attorney, went to law school in Chicago, and ended up practicing in Chicago and New York City, and loved the intellectual stimulation of being a lawyer. Didn't necessarily like being in big law and the lifestyle that came with it. So I became very interested in leadership development. Back in the day, there are many different names for that, but I wanted to help leaders and senior folks in any professional environment optimize their potential and succeed. And so I became interested in helping develop leaders. I got my MBA from Oxford in organizational development, and then proceeded to work in leadership development in different industries. 10 years into that, I left New York City and traveled the world for about a year because I wanted a change of pace. I wanted to leave the legal industry altogether and wasn't sure quite what to do next. I ended up in Austin and worked for Google in leadership development for a couple of years. With the idea at the time that I really wanted to do something on my own. I loved the autonomy that being in a startup world or being on my own provided. And I think once the idea the seeds were there, they were germinating for a few years. I got certified, I hired my own coach, and I think it was a natural progression, but a couple years later, I started my own business. And being in Austin and having such an incredible environment for startups and the energy of the city really led me to focus on working primarily with startup founders and executive leaders in startups. One, because it related to my own journey and sort of that kind of experience. And also there was, the opportunity was there, and I had met a couple of folks that were interested in what I did, and I've just scaled quite a bit since then.
And so was there a point during your journey where you thought to yourself, I made the wrong move, or whoa, hold on?
I think at every next stage, I had a lot of self-doubt and imposter syndrome. It was probably never thinking I made the wrong move, but there is a lot of insecurity about, can I do this? This is so hard. I left everything I knew how to do. And at a certain age, at 40, when I decided to leave the security of a job, I was 40, and I felt, what am I doing? How am I going to sustain this new life, and how can I succeed? What if I don't succeed? And so I was able to allow myself to go to the worst case scenario and imagine how I would deal if that were to happen. I thought about how probable is that to truly happen, and kind of looking at everything on paper, evaluating, okay, this is, my brain offers a lot of drama, but the reality of everything looks quite differently. And I was okay with the risk. I had a backup plan for what would happen if things didn't work out. I had savings, and I knew that my heart was drawing me to do that. I was passionate about what I was doing, and I normalized all of the obstacles. I was able to expect them, not make them mean that something's gone wrong, not make them mean that I need to quit, just knowing that that's part of the journey and a stepping stone. And one of the things that I think I learned that was most valuable was the ability to look at a mistake or a failure with curiosity and no judgment, because I, as a lawyer in the past, that was really hard on myself when things didn't go as planned. If I had a failure per se, and I wouldn't even look at it, I just felt like that was a failure and I felt badly, but I didn't have the openness or the courage to look at what had happened. And as having my own business, I really needed to evaluate every failure because it was feedback that was valuable for me to take the next move. And so the ability to look at failures with curiosity and truly ask what went well, what didn't go well, what would I do differently in the same set of circumstances, that is the journey for me. That is the growth and the scale, with curiosity and compassion and acknowledging that those things will happen. I just have to evaluate and take that feedback. But these are lessons. They're not failures. They're not shut your eyes, don't look at it because it's so painful. And so I think that lesson unexpectedly has helped me really stay in the game for the in the long run, as opposed to quit at a significant obstacle.
Wow, that's a powerful statement, because I can relate in the sense that being a lawyer, you're absolutely right. For us, it's very black and white in the sense that, you know, our client comes to us with a problem or an issue or a fire that we need to put out, and there's pressure of having to solve that problem. And if we don't get it right, it's crushing. You know, at least for me personally, I feel like a failure. And so, and it's interesting in the sense that what you do as a coach versus what I do and what lawyers do is significantly different. And so could you touch upon that when with your clients, the difference in terms of, because you're a lawyer too, correct? You come from that background. And so the distinction, and how for startups who are looking for a solution-oriented person, a lawyer, you know, something like that, versus a coach, do you mind just sharing what's, you know, the differences and how they should be looking at bringing on a coach?
Yeah, that is such a good question. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding still in that space, because when we hire a lawyer or some sort of a consultant, whether it be an HR professional or a marketing professional, we hire those folks to come in and solve a problem for us. We don't need to work with them super collaborative. We're paying them to come in and do a one-time solution, and there's a lot of value in that kind of service. But we're looking for someone else to do the work. In coaching, coaching is incredibly powerful, but it's a very different process. The coach usually is a neutral sounding board that can challenge a lot of the ways you're thinking about a problem, offer new perspectives, really shake the way you're thinking, and create a lot more solutions. But the coach will never tell you what to do. The coach will help you find the solutions for yourself. So it's a very different collaborative process. And the beauty of it is that the coachee ends up having skills that they take with themselves for the rest of their life, the rest of their business. They're not needing the coach to come in every time they have a problem, because now they have found a way to think differently and creatively, and they can take that skill set for the rest of their life. So the value of coaching goes beyond the engagement, whereas the consultant comes in and provides a one-time solution for a very specific problem. And they're both very, very valuable, but very, very different contexts.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And so in other words, if I understand what you're saying, essentially a coach gives you the tools to continue successfully on your journey. Whereas a lawyer, for example, when we go in, they tell us this is the problem. We have an employee that, you know, this X is the problem, you know, and I'll come in and give, you know, Y is the answer. So interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a corny analogy, but the consultants give you fish, they sell you fish, the coaches teach you how to fish. So you're able to do that for yourself.
I love that analogy. I don't think it's corny at all. So are you able to share with us, give us perhaps some examples of clients that you've had, and just, you know, some instances in terms of what you've seen and how you've been able to help them shape their startup journey as a coach?
Gosh, yes. And I don't know where to begin because there's so many amazing stories, but maybe I'll start speaking and you can kind of lead me into the right direction, knowing your audience. But I work with startups, founders, and the executive teams of startups, usually at B or C stage where they have some funding, they have about 25 to 50 employees, and I help them scale. Oftentimes I stay on with the startup for a couple of years. They scale to 200 employees. Sometimes they go public. And I help the leaders go through each of these stages of scaling, from having a small team to doing everything themselves, to deciding when do we need to hire certain leaders, and what is the right profile, what do we need, when do we need to create systems and processes as opposed to having everything be done ad hoc, what culture do we want to think about creating. Oftentimes founders go from being individual contributors and executing everything themselves and making sure it's done perfectly, to having to learn to delegate, and that takes a little bit of an adjustment of trusting someone else to do something maybe differently than you would have, or maybe trusting them to do it at 80% as opposed to 100, and sort of understanding that your zone of genius is not in executing everything you used to do. What got you to being a great individual contributor is not going to get you to leading a company and setting the strategy. And so identifying those activities, being able to plan. I do a lot of productivity work and time management work with leaders, because that is one of the areas that we all struggle with. We all wish we had more time. And so oftentimes folks are very reactive. Their days go from one meeting to the next. They never intentionally decide how to spend their time. And so I love that kind of work, because once we decide ahead of time what the week is going to look like, and then actually sticking to that plan, resisting the urge to be responsive to everything that comes in, deciding where you want to commit 2 hours of uninterrupted time and how to actually follow through on that plan. That is, I love doing that work, because there's so many talented leaders who lack that skill, and they end up burning out and leading themselves to exhaustion. They don't prioritize any of their personal time, any of their needs to exercise, or put their kids to bed, whatever it is that is valuable to them. And so I love doing that work and empowering leaders to have control over their time. There's so many other things, giving difficult feedback, not knowing how to do so, feeling that you hurt the relationship. It's the opposite. Criticism, it's not even negative feedback, is powerful if it's delivered the right way, because the employee wants to do better. They just want to know how. What is your expectation? How can you clearly communicate that? How do you communicate with the team? How often? In what format? There's so many pieces of being a leader that we don't learn. We have an amazing idea, we have a startup, but they're the pieces that make us effective at our job that we sometimes learn along the way, and that's perfectly fine. But when you're about to scale, you really want to have your partner, your thought partner, to help you along the way with these transitions.
So, Monica, are there any patterns that you see with leaders that are successful?
Yeah, that is such an interesting question. There are certainly a number of things that I see over and over again. The one thing that comes to mind that I feel like I've had to work with every client on is imposter syndrome or self-doubt. And it doesn't matter how successful the person is, how much validation they get externally, what stage they've built the startup to. And I think about all professionals, but now we're talking about startups. There's always a little bit of self-doubt when you get to the next level of success, when you get out of your comfort zone. No matter how much experience you have, you're going to, it's human, feel a little bit of, am I going to be found out? Am I a fraud? How did I get here? I don't belong here. People see that I'm not supposed to be here. And I love doing that work because it's so powerful. One, having that feeling of self-doubt is normal. So I want to make sure that leaders recognize nothing's gone wrong. I'm supposed to feel this way. That just means I'm leveling up. It's what we do with that that truly makes the difference between those who push forward and succeed and those who decide to stay in the comfort zone. And very few leaders stay in the comfort zone because they've pushed through this feeling over and over again, but they just think it's going to go away, and it doesn't. And so it's deciding to see those thoughts just as what they are. They're thoughts, they're not the reality, and being able to understand what are you thinking, and question them and reframe the thoughts of, I'm going to be found out, I don't belong here, and tell yourself, everything you've done to this point has led you to this, you weren't hired, you're not here by accident or by mistake. And consciously get your brain to focus on all of your successes. Think about all the reasons why you're the right person to be in this room, because our brain by default has a negativity bias, and so we look for all the reasons why something is not going to work, we're not qualified, and we need to intentionally direct it to think of the positive. the evidence for why we are here, why we're successful, why we're going to succeed, why we need to be confident. And so that ability to manage our minds is, I believe, a skill that's not being taught, but it's so incredibly powerful. We go to the gym, we work on our physical health. We rarely take the time to work on our mental health. Our brains are incredibly powerful, but if we let them to run on default, they don't always serve us. We really need to intentionally decide what we want to think about. So one example comes to mind with a client had a recent launch that failed. They put a lot of time and energy and they hired a lot of folks, and the launch didn't go as planned. So they have now two options to focus on. One, they can say, this was horrible. This is, I don't know if we should just close shop. It's a massive fail. That is true. That is an option for them to focus on. Or they can say, what's the lesson here? How can we learn and evaluate? This is just a stepping stone. This was possible that there's a lot of opportunity for us to take this and grow. And so while both of those are true, the human mind will tend to focus on the negative and really spin in that negativity without any upside. Or they can intentionally recognize what they're doing, acknowledge the feelings, feel disappointed, and then move on and focus on what's our next step. What is the lesson? What do we want to do here? And so that's what I help oftentimes clients see is they're both true. Where would you want to focus your attention? Maybe give both equally 50% of your attention. Don't go all in on the negative because there's no opportunity to move on from there. So that's an example of intentionally directing our brains, normalizing the self-doubt and the imposter syndrome at every level of growth.
Wow. Yes. I mean, I agree with what you're saying. I mean, it's something that, personally I've suffered from, and, notwithstanding the fact that I have an advanced degree and, I've been practicing so many years, I do see those moments where it's a turning point. I could either go to the right, give up, and that's it, and it becomes a memory, or I keep pushing through. And so I've never really identified it as imposter syndrome or anything like that. So what you're saying to me puts in perspective what happens, and then you see it in the startup community, because really the startups are in that space every day. If it's not the launch, it's the funding, or they didn't get the right people, or it could be a million of things that the leaders would absorb themselves as if this is my fault, nowhere to go from there. So
Yeah.
very
Thank
interesting.
you for sharing that experience. I really want to be out there and make this visible and normalize it, because when folks come to me, we have a trusted relationship. They're able to be vulnerable and say something to me that they will never share with the world. And I want to tell them everybody feels this way. There's an illusion that we think when we get to the $1 billion mark, when we go public, everything will be fine. I will feel successful. It doesn't happen. You will always have self-doubt because you've moved to the next stage, and you'll be still looking forward to someone who's better than you, and you will still compare and feel perhaps not good enough or not as good as you'd like to be. So I'd love to normalize this for all leaders and startups. It doesn't go away, and that's okay. It doesn't have to. It's just what you do with it that propels you forward or keeps you safe.
Wow. And do you see a difference in the leaders who have made that transition, who have normalized it with their staff as they start to grow?
That is such a good question. It's not something that people talk openly about. And in my relationship, things stay confidential, so I can't really talk about it broadly. I can without naming certain people. And in my conversations, I try to normalize it as much. I don't know that folks in the workspace talk about it. And I'm curious to probably ask a little more about how they develop that trust in the organization to fail forward, to talk about mistakes, to recognize and acknowledge that they have some lack of confidence in these moments. I do like that. I thank you for
Yeah.
food for thought for me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Because the world that we operate in, a lot of our advice and guidance that we give to our clients, always we tell them it always starts at the top. So if your team sees, and it doesn't have to be anything that they vocalize, it could be just the way they carry themselves, or the way they act, or the things they say, the things they celebrate, the things they don't celebrate. really has an impact, from an HR standpoint and from an employment standpoint, it really impacts whether we see it or not, the staff. And I can always, when a client comes to us and they come with a particular problem, I can always tell how it's going to go based on the leader's disposition and how the leader talks to me about the problem. Is it it's their fault, or is it, no, I have some responsibility in it? And so, and interestingly, in law school, we don't talk about that. We didn't learn about the psychological aspect of, how do you run your team and why does it start with you? And so I think the conversation that you're trying to normalize with, the imposter syndrome, I think is powerful for the leaders to get that, to understand that, and, to use it as a tool as opposed to, like you said, just letting things kind of disappear because they couldn't move from that negative conversation.
Yeah, that is such a beautiful example. And thank you for sharing. I think those behaviors, those leadership behaviors, are the silent culture. We talk about culture and how we have, Friday happy hours and whatnot, but what you celebrate, what you don't celebrate, what you judge, what you criticize, those leadership behaviors is what people look to define the culture of an organization.
Yes, yes. So if you could give, I guess, like three pieces of advice for startup leaders that has helped you or that has helped your clients, in addition to recognizing, I think the most important one, which is the imposter syndrome, are there other pieces of advice that you could share with them that maybe it's okay to talk about, or these are the things that, as a leader in the startup community, could be a good tool to put in your tool set?
Again, this is so hard for me to narrow it down, but I'll talk about my own experiences, have my own business, and then perhaps think how to talk about the biggest patterns that I can help startup leaders apply. But for me, it's hands down, expect and normalize the failures. Don't make them mean that anything's gone wrong.
Okay.
Evaluate those failures without judgment, with curiosity. Look at them as that feedback that's going to help me grow. And learning to manage my mind. That skill has completely changed my life, my business, but the rest of my life. And I'm so passionate about teaching that to the leaders that I work with. And then for leaders, some of that for sure, but also hire a coach, because there's no need to struggle and hustle and do it yourself. There's no being vulnerable to ask for help doesn't make you weak. It makes you smart. And I believe so much in having someone be your thought partner along the way. There's things that even I have a coach, I always will, because I can't see the label from inside the jar. I can't see the limitations of my own mind because they feel like reality. And so while I'm very skilled at helping others, and seeing how they are perhaps not thinking or doing something that serves them the best way and offering other perspectives, I cannot do this for myself. So hiring a coach is an amazing investment that pays off way past the length of the engagement. I truly, genuinely believe that. So that hopefully this didn't come across very self-centered.
No, no.
And then just talk to others. Don't be in isolation. Zoom out to what are you trying to build. When you're in the midst of a big problem, it feels like so much more impactful and problematic than it is if you zoom out to 5 years from now. Lean on the wisdom of the future self, you from 5 years from now. What would you do from that perspective? When you're trying to make a decision, what is the bigger goal? Don't think of the immediate problems. Those are some of the things that are particularly helpful, that having a sounding board you can talk through those ways of thinking about a problem.
So if I wanted to hire you, or any of the startups leaders that are listening to us, what are next steps? How could we get in contact with you, and how does that process look like?
Sure, yeah. So I have a website and a pretty active LinkedIn presence that has a link to schedule a free consult with me. But my website is monicalevicoaching.com. And on LinkedIn, you can find me under Monica Levy. and we would set up a 30 or 45-minute consult to evaluate what are your goals. Is coaching the right next step for you? Am I the right coach for you? And then we make a decision whether we move forward. And if not, I can always refer you to whether consultants, depending on what you need, or other coaches that may be better suited. And I love working with startups. So hopefully a lot of folks will at least understand what coaching is, how is it a valuable resource, and we'll look forward to getting in touch.
Yeah, no, I'm a big advocate of coaching, and I've absolutely enjoyed our conversation. I thank you for your time, and I agree with you. I think it's a skill set that leaders may not know that they need it, but it's definitely needed to get to the next.
Yeah.
So
Thank you. And thank you for all you do for startups. It's
yeah,
a
no, yeah, I love it too. Even though it is a slightly different, in terms of what we deliver, but I've enjoyed meeting individuals and having these conversations. So thank you. Thank you for connecting.
wonderful. Thank you.